All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the last session of the conference. I can't believe that we are already here, and I really hope you guys enjoy this last session because I know I am. So we have a medical student panel, and I'm really excited to introduce Priya Kumar, Brianna Felix, Jonathan Sussman, and Valerie Cruz as your panelists. And I'm going to hand it off to them to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then please fire away with those questions in the Q&A. Thank you. Go ahead.
Should we just introduce ourselves? I can go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Priya. I'm currently a first-year medical student at Harvard Medical School. I just started about 2 weeks ago, so I'm going to do my best to answer your questions, but I'm very new to this. I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in bioengineering in May. So I came straight through. And a little about me, I'm from New Jersey, born and raised there. So yeah, I'll just popcorn to Brianna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna. I am a fourth-year osteopathic medical student at Midwestern University in Glendale, Arizona. I went to U of A for my undergrad. I graduated with a degree in physiology and a minor in biochemistry. And then I took 2 years off, and then I started at Midwestern. So I'm going to popcorn over to someone else.
I can go next. I'm Jonathan. I'm a third-year MD PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm originally from San Diego. I did my undergrad at University of Southern California with degrees in biomedical engineering and music performance, and I did 1 year of research at the Scripps Institute before starting my MD PhD.
Hi. My in microbiology at the University of Puerto Rico, and then I did medical systems and my
Valerie, your audio is coming through really staticky. If you wouldn't mind like saying it again.
I am originally from Puerto Rico. Can you guys hear me now? Are you guys able to hear me?
It's still a bit in and out.
Now.
Maybe try it without the AirPods and see if that works.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, that's great.
Okay, so I was saying that I am originally from Puerto Rico. I completed my bachelor degree in microbiology at the University of Puerto Rico. Then I did my master's at a Heritage University in Washington State. And my first language is Spanish. I'm current second-year medical student at UAG School of Medicine.
All right, thank you so much, guys, for introducing yourselves, and we'll go ahead and get started in the questions. So please put questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and if you want to ask your question to them live, you can just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll invite you to speak. And also make sure to upvote the questions that you like, because we'll be going through them by the most upvoted. So we'll go ahead and get started with that. The first question is, this is a question for all of the medical students. Why did you choose the school you're attending?
Okay, I'll answer first. So I chose, number one, my most important thing was I wanted to stay close to my home. I'm from Arizona, so I wanted to stay in Arizona. I applied to both MD and DO programs. The DO program at Midwestern just spoke to me. I really liked their approach. I like the holistic appeal approach to patient care. So that was the biggest thing for me. And that's the reason that I chose my school.
Yeah, great. If anyone else wants to pop in and answer, go right ahead.
I can go next, and I can also weave in one of the other questions asked to me about MD PhD program as well. So University of Penn, well, I knew I wanted to get a PhD in cancer biology. And so looking at the strengths of research programs at different schools were a central focus, and the University of Pennsylvania is really one of the best in the area of cancer biology and computational biology, which is what my PhD is in. So that was really kind of 50% of it. I also, like universities as opposed to, smaller kind of medical institutions. So for me, that was an important factor because I like to do other things. I mentioned I had a degree in music, so being able to play music and participate with various groups in a larger academic setting was an important factor for me. And I'll just briefly touch on the MD PhD part. I came to medical school knowing I want to do both an MD and a PhD in order to integrate research and practical medicine in a unique way. When you do an MD PhD, you're not necessarily going to be the best clinician or the best researcher, but you have a set of skills where you kind of a unique set of skills allow you to contribute in an important way to whatever field. So I knew that I wanted to do both of the things, and despite the time commitment, that was still very important for me to do.
Yeah, I can pop in really quickly. Oh, sorry, Valerie. I'll just go really quickly, kind of similar to what's already been said, but I think location was a big one for me. I wanted to be in a city type area, mostly just because of like wanting to see a diverse patient population and kind of be in a more dynamic environment. Just considering that like being in school in your 20s, like I wanted to be able to do things. I wanted to have things to do outside of school and be able to see a new place. So being in a new city was important to me. And then I think also just like the qualities of the program. So one thing about HMS is that it's pass fail throughout all 4 years. And that, I mean, just being here for the first 2 weeks, I've very much seen how that changes the culture of the school. So I think that's also something to look for in terms of like grading, ranking, and just how they try to establish community with students. So.
I guess in terms of choosing a medical school, I wanted to be close to other minorities. For me, as a minority, it's really important to have that community where I'm going to have people that I can relate to, because medical school is tough. Other than that, I also enjoy because I'm abroad right now. My medical program has like 2 years in Mexico, and then we go to rotations to US. So it was important for me because I am interested like in global health, and I like doing medical brigades like out here in Mexico. And that's one of the things I chose UAG School of Medicine.
Yeah, that's great advice. Another question that we have is, what do you wish you had known while applying? Jonathan, if you want to get us started, go ahead.
I think I and many people don't quite realize the extent of time that the entire process takes. And I end up taking one gap year, but my initial plan was to, go straight through ideally, but I kind of came to realize that wasn't possible. All the classes that I had, senior year and not enough time to do the interviews and read all the essays. And I'm glad I did take that gap year because it really takes, I think it was a total of 1 month of travel time, total of all the interviews. Now, most of the stuff is virtual, but that doesn't really decrease the amount of time by that much. And probably about 1 to 2, maybe even a little bit more months total cumulative time of writing the essays. That's approaching half a year of full time just on the application, and including taking the MCAT as well. That is really a half a year of full time efforts just in terms of applying to medical schools. And knowing that that is the amount of time that it's going to take in advance, I think is something that's useful, not just for being able to plan, what your next years are going to look like, but being in that mindset that this is a really huge long-term project, with kind of taking a risk as well. but something that a mindset that you should have when you go into it.
Yeah, does anyone else have any other thoughts?
I guess it would have been helpful for me to know to not give it so much power to the application cycle, because sometimes we can get like so sidetracked with all the things, the deadlines that we have to do. And going by what Jonathan said, I do agree with knowing in advance, but also knowing how to control like that anxiety, not comparing yourself to others. It is your unique, like it is you're your unique person. And it's going to be tough. I say this because I was a second time applicant. So I did 2 cycles. I got waitlisted the first time around and the second time around as well in some other schools. So just having that sense of, okay, you will make it, and being patient, it would have been so much like easier for me to actually know that and not compare myself, and also not try to just be relaxed and not stress that much, because it's not the end of the world, even though when you think it is, but you will ultimately get there at the right time.
Yeah, for sure. We can move on to the next question. Do you guys have any suggestions for what students could do during gap years, for any of you that did take gap years? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I took 2 gap years. I would say I think it's really important to find some kind of experience with direct patient care. I think something like, a lot of people scribe nowadays. That wasn't as big when I took my gap years, but something like that is important. It gives you an opportunity to really see healthcare, so that you can decide later on down the road, I really like interacting with patients, or I really don't like interacting with patients. Things like this are important experiences that you can talk about in your interviews. They're important when you get on trying to figure out what you want to specialize in. So things like that are really important. I like direct patient care. Research is highly valuable as well. I took 2 years off. I would recommend doing 2 different significant things. For me, I worked as a medical assistant for both of those years. Looking back on it, I wish I had done maybe 1 year doing something and something different the other year, just to kind of shake up my CV and add on some things to my resume. But I think try to do volunteering or just something where you're working with people, and you're not just kind of sitting around doing nothing for your time.
Yeah, anyone else have a gap year experience that they would love to share on, or
Well, I can say that research is always a fail-safe thing to do. If you're interested in research, especially MD PhD, it's almost, if you're going to do a gap year for MD PhD, it's almost expected that would be research. Some people are highly successful doing an industry type of job that focus a little bit more on development type of things, but research and scribing, these are a couple things that are kind of fail-safe options, because medical schools know what they entail. It's not kind of a mystery as to what exactly you did. To be a research assistant, everyone knows it's well established what that actually is. Likewise with a scribe or a medical assistant, everyone knows what that is. So those are things that are kind of fail-safe. But to do something that's a little bit different than other people, you want to make it clear that what you're doing, demonstrates something about your main interests or skills, and is also presented in a way that's convincing that you spent your time in a way that was productive and also personally fulfilling.
Yeah, that's some great advice. Next up, we have a question about the interview process, what it was like, and if there's anything you would do differently. Priya, maybe if you want to start off with this one, go right ahead.
Yeah, I can start. So I think Sorry, I was just trying to find the question so I can make sure I'm answering it. Okay. Okay. The interview process, I think, can be really daunting just because like you're talking to these people who are like really often like the most accomplished people, and they're like determining like whether or not you get in. So like it's very normal to be nervous and like normalize like being a little bit like uncomfortable, maybe especially not having done something as intense as this before, because interviews are not so much a thing in like the college application process. I think like it's very understandably nervous. I think for me, what I found to be, I guess, like most helpful, I don't know if this is really answering the question, but I think most helpful would just be like practice, like genuinely just like practice with your friends, practice with your family. I recommend practicing with people who know you pretty well so they can tell you like, they can tell you honestly, like you need to not do that, or like you could talk way better about this thing that you did. I think that people who know you are able to give you that feedback. And like, don't be afraid to like, I don't know, like take a video of yourself talking or something like that. Like things like that are always helpful. In terms of anything I would do differently, I think I underestimated how draining just one interview would be. Like, I think that when you sit down and you're constantly just talking about like you and like you're thinking about like, oh my God, this person is evaluating me, can be really exhausting. So on days like if you do have an interview day, like give yourself a break. Don't plan anything in the evening. Like take it easy and be proud of yourself for like getting through the day because it is exhausting.
It's kind of interesting now being on the other side of things, having done the interviews a couple of years ago, and now myself being a student interviewer at Penn, and I kind of get to reflect on what are things that work well and what are things that don't work well, and it's hard to distill that into one or 2 points, but I'll pull out one point, which is to take ownership over everything in your application. If you wrote about something, even the littlest thing, you never know what could strike a connection for someone. And oftentimes that connection is made from some little hobby that you mentioned in your application. You think, oh, you just want to use your 15 little spots. So you put some silly hobby that you do in one of them and write a couple sentences. That could be the thing that makes a connection with one of the people. And you might not be expecting that that's actually going to be a thing that starts a conversation. Maybe whatever silly hobby you do, that person happens to be like, really good at that's their thing, or, and half the interview will be spent talking about the thing you never expected to talk about. Likewise, with any research or other things that are more complex, a lot of people I see, will participate in some lab and they'll have a small role in a project, and they'll write about it in the most complicated way possible. All these publications, all these big words, and will get asked about it and are not able to say exactly what they did or how they contributed to that project. And that's something that can make the difference between a really bad interview and also a really, really good interview. If you can explain everything that, how did you fit into everything that you wrote about? Even if you had a small role in some tiny research project, not just explaining what you did, but what are the implications of what you did? How did you contribute? What you learned from it, and how those skills are going to further your knowledge base or career in medicine in some way. So take ownership in every single sentence that you wrote in your application and be able to talk about it fully.
Yeah, I mean, moving on from that, kind of another question about a different aspect of the application, the MCAT. It's how did you prepare for the MCAT and what was your timeline and what resources did you use? Brianna, do you want to start off with this one?
Sure. So, I took the MCAT like 5 years ago now, 4 years ago. So I took it twice. I think everybody should take it twice unless you're, amazing on your first try. I feel like there's always room to improve. But I used Princeton Review for my resource. That's pretty much the only thing I did. I read the books that they sent, like the 15 books. And then I did a Princeton Review test prep course. And that's pretty much what I used for my 2 MCATs.
I kind of divided it into 3 phases, learning review material phase. I went over Princeton Review books cover to cover, kind of a solidification phase, going through Princeton multiple choice questions. There's a big workbook of that I think is pretty effective. Kaplan has some additional resources and some practice tests there. And then really an application to practice phase for the last couple, maybe month. In total, it was like maybe 3 months over a summer, but I also did some other things, went on vacation and so forth. So it wasn't entirely full time, where I went through all the AAMC material, which is I think now up to 4 practice tests plus the equivalent of 2 additional practice tests, and kind of went back and reviewed some things that I wasn't good at, like the reading part, which no one seems to be good at from my experience. Now, in terms of how many times to take it, this is, I want to disagree that it oftentimes, if to take it a second time is something you need to think very carefully about, because you need to be very, very certain at that point that you can do better the second time. Otherwise, it's doing worse the second time can be a big red flag to admissions committee that you didn't kind of wasted your time that second pass, or you didn't really improve in any substantial way. So I generally recommend if you're getting above, 70, 80th percentile, stick with that first time and spend your time doing something else, unless you really think that you can improve. You realize that you had some major gap or flaw in your knowledge in some way. I also recommend devoting a time during the summer or a block of time to it. A lot of people will do it, some successfully, some not so successfully, kind of during a semester, turning it into its own kind of class outside of the other classes, or doing it during a summer, on top of maybe summer research type of things. And this can work well, but it's also taking a risk. And if you're someone that likes to focus on one thing, or can be easily distracted, unless you know that you're really going to get a high score, I generally recommend starting by devoting all your time to it, at least for a few months, before you start adding other activities in.
Yeah, I can just quickly add on a couple of things. So generally, one thing that the way I kind of separated my time was just content review and then practice questions. So starting with like all the Kaplan content review, just went through all of it, even if it was stuff I was familiar with, just to get myself back onto like a foundation of like, okay, like I've reviewed all of this more recently. One piece of advice there is start doing practice questions sooner than you think. Like, don't wait until like a month and a half before the MCAT to like look at the questions, because one of the hardest things to get used to on the MCAT is like the question format, because it's oftentimes not something that people see like before that, where it's like a passage type thing and you have to go back and forth with the passage, and especially in a science context, it's just very different. So that's one thing, is just start practice questions like as soon into your prep as you feel comfortable doing. I recommend using UWorld. I use that, and there's like so many questions in that, and you can just like make like basically fake tests for yourself. You can also just like focus in on certain topics that you're struggling with. The other thing is regarding cars, because that is like one of the hardest sections. Took me forever to like understand what they were even trying to get us to do. But I think what worked best for me in that situation was Kaplan, in their book, they basically just walk through different strategies, and they say like, okay, here's one way to look at it. You can like read everything first and then look at the questions, or you can look at the questions and then read the path. Like, there's different ways that work for different people. So give it a try, but if a strategy is not working for you, give yourself time to change it. Like, try a different strategy, see if that works. Because once you hit your stride with cars, then you'll be fine, but it's just waiting for it to like click. So try different things with that. That's my like 2 cents there. But yeah.
And I want to add in one more thing I forgot to mention, since you brought up test taking strategies. Now, this is easier said than done, but a principle on the MCAT, and same thing with the SAT and ACT, that's always true, is one answer is correct for a specific reason, and 3 answers are incorrect for 3 different specific reasons why those are incorrect. And this is most helpful in cars, but helpful in all the other sections, is to really understand why that, not only why is that answer correct, but why are the other 3 answers incorrect? And if you can do that and incorporate that type, it takes time, but if you can incorporate that type of thinking into your review and into your practice, that really makes your test taking skills go to the next level, especially on the MCAT. And if you ever want to go back and take the SAT just for fun, for no particular good reason.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those responses. Next up, we have a question about what should I be looking for when considering which med schools to apply to? Valerie, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. I guess for me, I did apply very broadly to MD and DO programs as well. For me, how I set this, my medical school list that I applied, it was first that were closer to where I wanted to live. Obviously, a specific state, but not only that, like I mentioned before, it was very important for me that the school was very high, like on diversity and inclusion, because some of the medical school will have like, I don't know, 2% of diversity and inclusion, and I don't know what's that. Is that a person or? So for me, that was really important because I feel that this was going to make me feel confident, comfortable, and it was going to help me in the projects that I wanted to do within medical school, like leadership roles. And also it was going to support me and it was going to help me get better grades, essentially. So at least for me, I ranked the schools in terms of their diversity percentage, because you can find that like an A and C. And that's how I went through it. Obviously, considering that I matched the stats and that they had like city lifestyle kind of, because as Jonathan said, he's a musician. I also love to like dance, like ballerina. I was a ballerina most of my life. So having a space that I could just go to a dance class, attend a dance class where I had free time was really important for me too.
Yeah. Any other recommendations?
When it comes to choosing the schools, a lot of people spend a lot of time doing really intricate research on all the different specific programs that a school has on on their websites and promotional stuff. But really, all that is advertisements, and it really is hard to know what a school is like until you actually go there and are there for a couple of years. So I think what I did, and I think this is advice I generally give, is find a few criteria that are kind of inclusion criteria and a few criteria that are perhaps exclusion criteria. I want to live in a big city, and I don't want to go to a place that's not a university, a large academic university or something like that. And a few of these criteria can really narrow down your list really quickly, and then just apply to all the ones you have left. Maybe if you have too many, take out a few, or if you have too few, then add in a few that you maybe heard good things about. But I think the tendency is to overthink this. And as long as you're applying to enough schools, I think that's the much bigger issue than what those schools exactly are on the list.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Next up is one that I'm also curious about. It's what has been the most fun thing you've done or learned while in med school? Brianna, do you want to take it?
Sure. I will say that's kind of a tough question, mostly just because med school is tough. But I would say for me, so basically the structure of most medical schools, the first 2 years you're in the classroom, the second 2 years you're out on rotations. I would say the first 2 years in the classroom were not my favorite, but these last 2 years that I've spent out on rotations, they've been actually really fun. I think the more time I spend with patients, I really enjoy it. Learning from preceptors, learning from other physicians who have been in the field for years and years. They have so much advice and there's so much you can learn from them. So I would say that's been my most enjoyable part of medical school. I think it's once you get out there and you're actually doing the things that you want to do outside of the classroom, that's when my interest was piqued. And just getting to rotate in all the different fields of medicine and really solidifying what you want to go into, what you want to practice, what you like, what you don't like, keeping an open mind to those things. That's all the stuff that I enjoy. So that's probably been my most enjoyable part of medical school.
I can go next. So I'll kind of give two answers, I guess, one more like school-based and one more just like peer like based, like the people I met. And also this is 2 weeks in. So like take this with a grain of salt. But I would say one of the things that we did during orientation week was we had the opportunity to go out into the community and meet with a community organization that's doing work with one of the surrounding areas, like around the hospitals. And so it was like, it was super interesting because it was like related to like food insecurity, and they were doing some really interesting work with like a mobile market basically. But I think getting to so early on interact with a community that like I'm going to be serving for the next 4+ years, I think it was really fulfilling and like an exciting way to see, like even in a non-medical context, like the impact that like we can have. So that was really cool, and I highly recommend that like when you're entering med school to like get to know the community. On the flip side, I think someone asked me like what's something I had known like 2 weeks ago before I started. You're going to meet a lot of people, and I think that it can be draining, it can be exhausting, but I think it's also one of the most fulfilling things is like being able to talk to your classmates, hear about their gap years, hear about all of their successes and like all of the things that brought them here and where they're hoping to go. I think making those connections has been really, really fun. So I would say with the time that you do have, because obviously, yeah, med school is hard, I think make the time to get to know the people around you.
All right.
I can
Oh,
go.
no, go ahead.
So for me, in my medical school, we didn't have um, anything related to like service dogs because we're here in Mexico, so it's a little bit challenging. So one of the things that I created was this program where I have a medical service dog. So I actually bring my service dogs to some of my classes depending the day that I need it. So that was I will say really encouraging, not only fun, but it's surprising because it's also going to speak up to the stigma of mental health within medical school. So it's like a conversation starter. People ask me, a lot of people don't know about that. So a project that I'm trying to implement while I'm in here in this community is try to speak more about mental health and why it's important. And that has been a really fun project that I didn't see myself doing, but I'm really open about it and I'm really happy to do so.
Yeah, if anyone has questions about that, please ask, and I'm be happy to talk more. Hopefully you talk more about that. Next up is a question about the cost of medical school, and is how are you guys affording medical school?
I can start. Do the MD PhD. This is my plug for the MD PhD.
For those who are not doing an MD PhD, what advice do you have?
I guess, Priya.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Okay. I guess before I started medical school, I planned for this. I took gap years. One of the reasons was because of a financial situation. So I actually made like a Excel list of all my expenses in medical school. My family's not helping me, so I'm taking out federal student loans aside with some savings that I did and maximize the amount that I'm spending. Another thing for coming into Mexico is like it's cheaper just because of the exchange, the monetary exchange. So that's gonna save me a bit before I move back to the US next summer. So I guess it's just taking in mind whenever you apply to medical school, what's going to be the cost of living, which apartment, are you going to like share rooms with people? Are you going to be on your own? Do you have family or kids? Like just I did it 1 year before. So as I was doing my applications, I was also doing the Excel sheet of like probably an average cost of all would cost me living and all like those expenses. And because I'm the first generation, I always go to my family, hey, so will you consider like donating some money and things like that, even friends? So I guess that has been something I have done. Other thing is like while I'm in medical school, I have done a couple of things in my medical school to have like tuition discount, if that per se, like trying to apply to, for example, for UWorld to take a step 1 to get discounts for that, discounts for different external resources. So like I'm just trying to maximize the money that I have, like the student loans, essentially.
Yeah, so just to add to that, medical school is expensive. It's pricey. For me, I took out loans. That's the only way I can really afford it. I have federal loans. But sometimes I have anxiety about how much I have to pay back. But everybody kind of goes through that, I think. And there's so many repayment programs. Once you get into medical school and once you start accumulating all these loans, you'll find out that there are certain ways that you can get forgiveness on your loans, federal repayment plans. You can refinance your loans. There's ways that they help you pay back. They help you to pay back the money that you owe. And honestly, frugality is super important. When you're in school, maybe you don't get a Starbucks every single morning. So things like that, just cutting costs where you can, living with roommates, stuff like that, that's all going to help you in the end. But hopefully, you're investing in your future. You end up becoming a physician, you make a pretty good salary, and then you can hopefully pay it all back. So, at some point, it's worth it.
I think we have someone who wants to ask their question live, so I'm going to invite them to the stage and have them ask. Go right ahead. Do you want to ask your question live? I think you can unmute since you raised your hand. If not, no worries. You can put it in the Q&A and I can ask. Gonna move on and I'm gonna ask the next question. Do you guys have any tips for organic chemistry or difficult prereqs? Yeah, go right ahead. Priya, maybe if you want to start since you just got into medical school, congrats by the way.
I'm definitely not equipped to answer this question because I did not do well on Orgo, but that's okay. I guess general tips for like if you're anxious about a class or if it's not going so well from the beginning. I think one thing I didn't do, but I've had friends who like this was really how they handled it, and I like think it's a great way. I think just talk to your professor. I think leaning on the resources that like the course has is a good way to like at least like feel a little bit more supported in the course, because I feel like a lot of time it can feel like you're struggling alone. So whether that's like professor, TA, other people in the class, like find a way to like not feel as alone in like dealing with how tough a class is, because honestly these classes are like made to be tough, which kind of sucks, but like that's how they're kind of made to be. And I think reaching out to resources that your school might have, so like peer tutoring, people who have taken the class before might have really good advice for you on like study tips and stuff like that. And then if you're like really, really nervous about like starting a course, just even Googling like, oh, how can I prepare to take this course, and seeing if there's like background or like refresher courses or things that you can take, just finding those resources to kind of manage your own nervousness about starting a difficult class like that. That's my like 2 cents.
Many of these classes are really about, just like we were talking about with the MCAT, it's really about practice of a particular skill set rather than just rote memorization or knowledge. And organic chemistry is a great example of that. Maybe 50% of your time of studying should be actually studying. Then the other 50% really should be practicing, finding ways to seek out practice tests, textbook problems, more problems, old materials from the class. There's lots of ways to get access to lots of stuff. And that's what talking to the professor and the TA and older students can be really helpful. And don't underestimate the amount of time that actually needs to be spent practicing the skills, because all these classes really come down to just taking 2 or 3 tests. And even if you know the material really well and you understand all the concepts, it's easy on the test to just at that moment get confused and not be able to actually answer the questions at hand. When it comes to organic chemistry, it's all about the electrons. Just follow the flow of the electrons. If you don't know what the electrons are doing, you don't know what's going on in organic chemistry.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know that that's definitely one of the most stressful things about being pre-med is organic chemistry. So it's super good to know that's what to hear what you guys did. Another question more focused on the applications is, what do you think made you a successful applicant during the admissions process? Jonathan, do you want to start off?
Sure. I think, first of all, I think this is a really excellent question. This is a great question. I've, and likewise, I've tried to think about, what are the things that precluded me from getting into what are the reasons that, these places like me, and what are the reasons that these places did not like me. And I think in terms of what made me a successful applicant is kind of having a unique set of interests and background, and being able to spin that into a story that demonstrates not just interest in medicine, but how I would add to the culture of the university as well. I have a degree in music, played professionally flute in college, and still do, while also doing computational cancer biology, and overall these kind of just sets of different interests and qualifications. I in my essays and my interviews, I expressed how these particular things, come together in a unique way, that even though there's many other people that might have these particular interests or background, having all of these particular interests give me a new perspective, and interest in answering particular research questions and helping a particular demographic, clinical demographic as well. And overall that I could convince admissions board that I would contribute to the school in an important way. And I think that's the key thing to think about, is what are your unique set of interests and skill, and how can you weave that into a story that shows that you have something to add to a medical school more than just what anyone else has to add.
I can go next. I kind of have 3 pieces of advice that I kind of give people when I talk about this. So first thing is know what they're looking for. So med schools kind of have very clear what they expect from you in terms of patient experience, volunteering, clinical and non-clinical, MCAT, grades, whatever. They have all these things that they want. And so when you're thinking about your schedule for undergrad, being aware of okay, am I making sure that I'm going to have time to get some patient experience before I'm applying to medical school? So just thinking that through, making sure you're hitting all those buckets in some way or another. I think another thing is being genuine. I think that it's really, really hard to commit yourself to something, especially if you're trying to show depth of commitment, to commit yourself to something for years that you're just not interested in. So if there's a pre-med club that you're only in because you think it looks good, don't do it. Find a club that's much more worth your time and your energy, because when you talk about that in your essays and your interviews, that comes through. It genuinely comes through. And that's, I guess, my third thing is give as much of yourself in your application as you feel comfortable giving, because I think there's so many opportunities to share stuff about yourself. There's so many essays, there's a personal statement, there's the activities, there's all the secondary essays, and then there's the interviews. You have opportunity after opportunity. If you're saying the same stuff again and again, they're gonna be okay, maybe this is just someone who's kind of just this one-dimensional thing. But if you're able to share all these different things, and I'm not saying do 30 activities, don't do that, but I'm saying more find a way to share parts of you that you might not think are interesting, your hobbies, or your this random travel experience that you had that actually can be really impactful when an admissions person is reading your essays or talking to you in an interview.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Priya and Jonathan, for those answers, especially considering, Jonathan, you're reviewing applicants, and Priya, you just got in. So yeah, thank you so much. Next up is also kind of about the application, but in a different sense. It's, how many medical schools did y'all apply to, interview at, and get into? Yeah, Brianna, do you want to start maybe?
Sure, I'm trying to think. So I can't tell you how many I applied to. I applied to a lot, but because it was quite some time ago, I can't tell you the exact number. I think I had interviews at 3 places, and then waitlisted at one, got accepted to another, and yeah, that was my experience. Did I answer the question? Was there anything else?
Yeah, I think you got it. It's just
Okay.
apply to, interview at, and get into.
Yep, that was me.
I can go next. So I did apply to 30 schools. I got interview at 2 DOs and 3 MDs, and the one that I'm currently in, which is like an international program. And yeah, I guess that's it, right?
I can go next. So I applied to too many schools. I applied to 41, I think. I interviewed at 14 of them and I got into like 7, I think. And then a wait list at a few. So
Now I've had time to think of the numbers. So I applied to 28, interviewed at, well, I was given interviews for 14. That doesn't mean I went to all the interviews, some were canceled. If I already got into one that I would rank above, I'd nix the other interview. So was given interviews at 14, got into 4, and then I think waitlisted at 3, and then I nixed all of those once I had already decided. So I didn't actually let it play out.
Yeah, I think the number really speaks to your point earlier about how it's a big time commitment to apply, because obviously you're applying to so many schools, writing so many things. So yeah, next up is another question about the MCAT, but just more in depth. How did you break down the subjects to study for the MCAT? Like if you're planning on studying for 3 months, how did you break down the subjects, and how did you know that you learned enough to move on to the next subject?
I can start with this because I was the last one to talk about the MCAT stuff. I let the books dictate what I learned. So when I said at first, I divided into kind of 3 sections. At first is just content review, then is, and I did kind of a diagnostic practice test in that phase. And the second is really kind of enforcement of questions, and then really going into practice. I went through the Princeton cover to cover book, Princeton books cover to cover, and that's generally what I recommend. Even the stuff I forget who mentioned it, but it was a good point that even the stuff you already know, it's easy to forget little details here and there, and you think, oh, I was really good at organic chemistry or whatever, like I don't need to review that. But what's on the test is they're not testing you on all of organic chemistry. It's not like a final exam for 8 classes. It is a specific set of knowledge, specific set of things that they're going to ask you for the MCAT that is a kind of, intersected subset of the different things you have in your classes. And going through all the material, just allowing whatever practice material you use. Princeton Review is a good one for content review. Kaplan tends to be a little bit more dense, but a little bit more thorough in their books. Allowing that to dictate the proportions helps you determine also what are the ratio of kind of yield on different subjects on the test. If it has 5% of the books are on organic, I'm just making numbers here. If like 5% of the stuff is on organic chemistry, and you spend 5% of your time reviewing that, it's kind of in proportion with the amount of, stuff that you would actually need to know on the test. And if you happen to know the stuff and go through the book quicker, you're still just allowing that book to kind of dictate the pace as to what you review. But as long as you cover everything, that is really the goal.
Yeah, does anyone else have any tips for how they broke down studying for the MCAT? Or yeah, we can move on to the next question. This one is another interview question. It's, what was the hardest interview question you were asked?
Oh, sorry. I was like just talking to someone about this the other day. I got this. Okay. So this one stuck me. And after this interview, I was so upset because I was like, I don't even want to hear back from this school, because I was like, why did they ask me this? So they asked me, this school was very like scenario based. But it wasn't like a MMI type style thing. It was just like a regular interview, but they happened to ask more scenarios. And I was asked to talk about a time where I had to help someone with something inconsequential. And I was just like, what, why, like, why would you ask me that? And so I like floundered for a little bit and came up with an answer about like something my friend had talked to me about. And like the interviewer was nice enough and kind of guided me in the right direction. I think my advice, if you encounter that question, is like maybe take it from like if you were part of a student group or in a lab or like something like that. Like sometimes people ask questions or like ask you to do things that are just like not worth your time, but you have to like find a way to like level-headedly like manage that. So I think that's kind of what they were looking for. But yeah, I was not expecting that question at all.
Does anyone else have a question that they thought of off the top of their head?
I remember I was asked once, if you don't get into medical school, why would that be? I thought that was kind of a stupid question. But it's like the point of mentioning this is not I don't think too helpful, because these questions are so stupid that the odds of you being asked any of these individual silly questions are basically zero. In fact, I find all of these kind of behavioral or situational questions to be really stupid. Actually, I don't think that this helps evaluate people, and this is the case from all the people I talk to who are in companies and so forth, and family members who are like work in companies and interview people. None of us ask any of these type of things, and when I interview people, I want to know about what you actually do. And so what the lesson here is, when you get one of these questions that you have no idea what they're getting at, it seems like some trick question, turn it back to about something that you've done. Be able to use that question as a way to discuss some of your experience or qualifications. And if you have no idea, how what are they possibly getting at with such a stupid question that they might ask, just forget about it and use that as a kind of launching pad to get into a conversation about something else. And you can be the one in the interviews that drives the conversation forward. It's not just needs to be question answer, but in many of the interviews, you should take an active role in driving that conversation forward. If you get a question that you're just like, this is a stupid question, use that as a way to, get into something and drive the conversation forward from there.
So sorry, I just wanted to answer this question. So I think something that's really important, a question that's really important, I found it difficult, is just the question of why should I accept you to medical school? Like, why should we accept you here? And I think that question is super important, number one, and it's challenging because you really have to have a lot of insight. Think about why are you better than everybody else? Why are you going to be a better student there than everybody else? And I think that's a challenging question. I have to think about that when I apply to residency in a month, and I'm having challenges with it. We all are applying with good grades. We all have good scores. We all have, extracurricular activities. And so I think if you can come up with a really good answer to that question, that sets you apart from someone else, I think that's imperative.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So this next one is, what is the most difficult part of medical school for you guys? And have you ever had any moments where you felt like giving up or something along those lines? And maybe some advice on how you dealt with that moment. Valerie, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I guess I am starting my second year, and I feel like knowing which study method works best for each different class or topic is going to be one of the most challenging things, because at least in my case, I don't study the same for different classes. Also, at least in my school, transitioning from just taking classes, just normal professor-student interaction, rather than second year is more, all of it is PBL. So we don't take classes, we just go prepare, take a quiz, do work like in groups, and then come back. Just transitioning into that, knowing how to bounce back has been challenging, and it's something that I'm currently managing.
I would agree with that. The learning style of medical school is a little bit different than an undergrad, especially since, as I was talking about just with the MCAT, and then as I was mentioning with organic chemistry, that, with undergrad classes, it really is about, and with the MCAT, it's really about just kind of practice, solving problems of different sort. But a lot of medical school is really just memorization, and kind of transitioning from this kind of problem-solving mentality, which is important for undergrad, to this, just rote memorization of lots of classes. Like, here are 27 types of drugs. Remember what they all do. Here's a multiple choice test on this next week. Is a very different way of learning. And it becomes a little bit more problem-centered when you get into kind of taking step 1 and step 2, and then going into the clinics and taking the corresponding shelf tests that you take at the end of each rotation. But for the first couple of years, it really is just rote memorization for the first part, with some concepts sprinkled in, but it's not problem solving. It's a very different way of learning. And I think adapting to that new way of learning, and finding out what works for you and what doesn't. Also in the setting of a pass-fail system where you don't need to get everything right all the time, but also you want to learn it and need to know enough to be competent. That's a kind of a difficult situation to navigate, but something everyone figures out. That I can assure you.
I don't have much to say because I haven't been here very long yet, but I guess one thing I'm anticipating is just losing my balance, like losing my work-life balance and getting too caught up in learning and letting my mental health decline. So I think one piece of advice that I was given recently that I think was really helpful was, when you do have time in your life to find the things that bring you joy, do them and make them a habit and build them in then. So now if you have time where you are figure out what those activities are that genuinely recharge you, and find a way to make sure that you can carry those with you wherever you go. Because I think having something to do and hold on to outside of class, outside of studying, even just for yourself, I think it's super important. So do that now, or do that as soon as you can. I know I'm still working on it, so it takes time, but yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is the last question that we are able to answer. So I'm so sorry if your question was unable to be answered. But if the panelists are willing, you can put your emails in the chat and see if you can email your questions to them directly. But yeah, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us and answering all those questions and speaking. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else learned a lot. It was very insightful and valuable. And so that is officially our last session of the conference. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I hope you enjoyed it, and please head on over to our closing session to hear some announcements and about a special surprise giveaway and about the giveaway winners. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.